Here we are. So this is the roadmap of this exploration that I'm sharing with you. I'll introduce the topic of my presentation, tell you something about the novel, minor detail, what I mean by meanings of place names, toponyms in literary scapes, the method adopted, what I've found out so far, and I'll try to draw some conclusions. So this is where and when my love story with this book started. And I'm deeply grateful to my friend and colleague, Betty Maddock, with whom some of you know, who in June 2020 invited me to join one of the monthly meetings she organizes for the Manipal Book Club, which is focused on Arab literature. And the book they had chosen was Minor Detail, a gift. It sliced through my heart. And here it is with the three different book covers, maybe food for thought, the one published in Melbourne, London, and New York. With a daring architecture, Shibli challenges the notion of a linear narrative by dividing the book into two sections of equal length that revolve around a number of minor details with an amazingly deceptive simplicity of style. The first part, which unfolds over 4 days in August 1949, describes the patrols of the Negev desert conducted by an Israeli commander to clean it of any remaining Arabs. The dehumanization of military power culminates in the rape of a Bedouin girl, the only, so to speak, survivor of one of those patrols. In the second part, the novel shifts into the present, to the restless mind of a Palestinian woman who wants to find out more about that rape after reading an article reporting the event. The minor detail that triggers her desire to explore what actually happened is that the crime had occurred 25 years earlier, the same day as her birthday. Her ambitious drive ends up drawing the powerful map of an erased landscape. Besides this structural border that I have marked with a slice taken from one of the book covers, there are others that recur throughout the novel. The actual borders that the commander is defending in the Negev desert, the checkpoints through which the woman must pass to move around Palestine, Israel, the boundaries between what can be known and what can only be guessed about the atrocity. The borders that the woman in the second part repeatedly mentions to describe herself. For example, my inability to identify borders, even very rational borders, makes me overreact sometimes or underreact at other times, unlike most people. The narrative viewpoint also marks a sharp break. The cool third-person narration that makes what happens even more horrifying in the first part leaves room to an overheated, stuttered, broken first-person narration in the second half. In other words, the novel is fascinating in many ways, a jewel. What has struck me from an onomastic point of view, sorry, because I don't know why, but I'm clicking and it doesn't go ahead. Okay, here we are. So I was saying what has struck me from an onomastic point of view is the fact that all the living characters are nameless. And these are in alphabetical order, the common names used to refer to persons in part 1 and part 2. They are identified, as you can see, in terms of their job, gender, age, hierarchy in the military. This namelessness contributes to shaping a bare setting and foregrounding toponyms, which are the only names we come across. So I sensed that their presence in the text was special, as though they were characters, and I hope I'll be able to explain why. Now, here we have place names and their meanings. So before doing so, I'd like to just say a few things about the meanings of names. As Heiko observed yesterday, whether we can say that names have a meaning has been a problem in onomastic studies for a long time. So I'd like just to say a very few things on the perspective taken. Even though technically speaking, names have no sense, that is, they have no content that contributes to the meaning of the utterances containing them, they do have considerable potential for taking on meanings depending on their context and context of use. One of the most tackled issues in literature has been the manipulative use of names for ideological purposes, and also the strategic role that names may play in the world of tourism, in the sense that referring to their ability to suggest distinction, originality, or authenticity. And here is a very quick example of what we can learn from the context around a toponym. In this case, the very strong association between the place name Salem and witchery, witches, and the sadly famous witch trials of 1692, to the point that the city is also known as Witch City, and the name has become a synonym of witch hunt. As for toponyms in the literary landscapes, I have quoted this line from Nicolaisen: place names are shaping forces in the literary landscape, because it seems to me that it sums up very well what I'm trying to say. When it comes to literature, we must say that anthroponyms have had the lion's share for quite a long time now. And even though the first study I've been able to find so far draws back to 1946, Richmond, 1946, it's a paper dealing with ballad place names. Place names have been a bit neglected so far. For the purpose of this study, I found quite useful this consideration by Nicolaisen, 1979, that is, the identity of a literary name is confined to the work, oh sorry, I misspelled work, of literature in which it appears. If this is true, then the recognition of literary names in the non-literary world is a mistaken assumption. The selection of names and their literary usage has in most instances only tangential relations with the way in which a name means lexically, or with the fact that it has or is supposed to have a counterpart in the non-literary landscape. So as I am trying to see to what extent names can play a kind of a linguistic role in fiction, this seemed to me quite effective. That is, I'm trying to see to what extent what I sense, that is that toponyms are not used to set the setting, but are kind of endowed with some kind of agency in this novel, from the narrative point of view. And also what I'd like to see is to what extent toponyms can be used for the linguistic analysis of a literary text as one of the categories that have been considered, for example, by Leach and Scott, that is, I mean, grammatical categories or figures of speech or sentence length or ways of reporting speech and thought. So one more category. What I've done, I have manually collected data related to place names and common nouns referring to places, onomastic statements in the novel, because the subject of names is brought up more than once, and common nouns referring to places. And I have used Antconc, not because I had an interest in frequencies, but to have a picture of the verbal environment around some of the items that I have analyzed. And here are the toponyms that I have collected. As you can see, we can draw a border between the two sections of the novel, also as far as toponyms are concerned, because almost all of them occur in the second part of the novel. So we can draw a broader picture if we look at the context. And here we are. The woman starts her journey in search of the truth in a very anxious state of mind. She gets out of her place and says, I haven't gone right, not even on food, for years. And this means that the landscape around her is quite challenging. So she keeps looking at the many maps that, like a passenger, sit in the seat next to her. Some of them depict Palestine before 1948, and others are contemporary maps. So the only two visible Palestinian villages are Abu Ghosh and Ain Rafah. I go back and open the map, which depicts Palestine until 1948, and let my eyes wander over it, moving between the names of the many Palestinian villages that were destroyed after the expulsion of their inhabitants that year. And I have highlighted in green the toponyms that are kind of a point of reference, let's say, for her. And in red, all the names that are unfamiliar, so unfamiliar that they invoke a feeling of estrangement, that she is not at ease in this context. Or here, a very large park called the Canada Park now extends over the area where old village used to be. As you can see, all that's around this name is something that points to the fact that they no longer exist. So used to be, or a village which no longer exists, all that is left, and all that hasn't been destroyed is a single house. It's been a long time since I've passed through here, and wherever I look, all the changes constantly reassert the absence of anything Palestinian. The names of cities and villages on road signs, billboards written in Hebrew, new buildings, even vast fields between the horizon on my left and right. And here, the last one. So these toponyms seem to tell her stories about what it is, what is not, what is no longer, culminating in a very powerful image. But let's read that together. Meanwhile, names of cities and settlements appear along the road, and do shapes of houses, fields, plants, streets, large signs, and people's faces. All of this accompanies me. on my journeys while rejecting me too, provoking an inexplicable feeling of anxiety. So the way she describes, she refers to these places, to these names, is as in terms of an emotional relationship, as though they were some kind of living beings, accompanies, rejects. So I examined the triangle area again and the names of towns which I'm reading for the first time. And this one is the image that I was mentioning before that I find very, very effective. Palestinian villages, which on the Israeli map appear to have been swallowed by a yellow sea, appear on this one by the dozen, their names practically leaping off the page. So I start the engine back and set off toward my target. Here is an example of taken from common nouns. As you can see, there are many common nouns in the novel that refer to places. And in fact, what I could see is that it is mainly from them that we get the sense of a setting, not from toponyms. And here is an example. The soldiers, and here the point of departure the point of departure was taken with map and camp. The soldiers in attendance listened as they followed the movement of his hands over the map laid out in the front of them, where the camp's position appeared in the form of a small, barely discernible black dot inside a large gray triangle. So these descriptive names, map and camp, give us an idea of the silence, loneliness, of the bare setting. That's a very important feature of the first part of the novel. It's a very important feature also in terms of the language used. That's whispered and everything is detached, slow. So many actions are described in a very repetitive way, and this makes more effective the rape that occurs towards the end of the first part. And here we are with some of the findings what I've come up with so far. That is, in this novel, the present absence of toponyms seems to stand for, it's as though the land were telling us its history. The absence, their absence reverberates like the far-off echo of an obituary. They no longer exist, they used to be. Toponyms seem to interact with the human and with us, both by means of their present absence and if we think of their switching from one map to another. What I've seen so far seems to suggest that it may be quite useful if we see names as one of the linguistic categories that we might consider in the linguistic analysis of a literary text. To be honest, at the beginning, what I was thinking of was something like this. That is, I wanted to provide a map of Palestine before 1948 and a contemporary map. But then the more I have analyzed the text, the more I've realized that there is no point in taking into account actual places. What is really effective is this kind of relationship between the human the characters, the living beings in the place, and all that is there in the background. I mean, independently of their actual existence, or it does not actually matter whether we precisely identify each single toponym. Trying to draw some conclusions, I'd say that a remarkable feature here is the emotional revaluation of the landscape, in the sense that the erased landscape is kind of recovered through language. She mentions place names, she reads place names, and it's as though through language they were brought back to life, at least in literature. And this is a quotation from Adania Shibli, the author, who says, people may gain from literature what they cannot get from their own lives. And this refers to the very complicated situation in Palestine. I also wonder to what extent the notion of toponym as characters, although you used it in inverted commas, can be generalized. I mean, it is quite effective in this novel, where the language itself seems to be a character. So I wonder, and any suggestion is very welcome. And also, I'd like to close my presentation with this quotation from the author herself. The novel started from this contemplative inquiry on how the complacency of language can inflict pain, and also how the complacency of language can deflect pain. These two base ideas were all that I started with, nothing else. Language then came, word by word, over those 12 years. It took her 12 years. The form and the content were revealed bit by bit. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
There was something that I was wondering. I mean, could you please expand a little bit more on what you analyzed, what you found with Antcom? So the verbal environment around the items that you analyzed. If you could go back to, and then we have a question from Chris Davini.
I collected data related to both characters who are represented and referred to with these common nouns and places, and looked at to see to the narration, which is very interesting in this case, because as I said at the beginning, it's not a linear narrative. These two parts interact with one another. There are so many, they are kind of very different from one another, but they also share common features that are there, kind of creating more and more links between the two. So they are far in time from one another, in the same place, but the place that changed, and there is no one who talks about these changes. It's as though the changes were coming from the places themselves, from the language itself. And that's why I was trying to see what I could find, which is something that I have already done, I mean, for Salem or other analysis with different purposes, for example, evaluative language around Bombay or Mumbai and so on. But in this case, it seemed to me especially interesting because of the role that language plays in recovering, in trying to recover what's been lost. And it's alive through language, through literature.
Yeah, it's also about memory somehow, right? And memory through language, through, well,
What's erased on the
text.
map
Yeah, but also
can
through maps.
leave.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. There is a question
Chris,
from Chris. Yeah.
Hi, Chris. It's so nice to see you.
Hi, Luisa. Luisa, I just wanted to comment on how much I appreciated this. So many times in literature, rightly, we spend time analyzing the names of characters, but you've given us a way of looking at the names of places in literature. You've even suggested that in some cases they turn out like almost like characters with agency. Anyway, I really like having a fresh thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
I would like to maybe comment. I certainly think that you're on the right track there, how the toponyms shape the narrative also. I think of, well, the toponyms, even in Shakespeare, how the toponym of Shrewsbury and Falstaff's speech about honor, saying that honor has no value whatsoever. It's a very funny speech, of course. But the toponym then becomes memorable. And I think back also about novels that have been written about the area where I grew up a few years ago, and how the historical novel mentions places that I was very, very familiar with, and but are different in my experience, and had had names that I referred to that are different. Then I go back and I visit the same area now, and again the names have changed. The big pond where I would catch frogs has now been filled in with a big shopping center and mall, with new names of many sorts. So I see 3 layers of naming and references, and that constitutes, of course, a history that's captured in part by the novel of early times, then partly with my very, very personal experience, and now with the experiences of new people, settled by people who never were there when I was there. So there's constant change.
So you mean people who never were there, who talk about places they have never been
Well, they have
to?
renamed everything. It is a new reality, in a sense. But at the same time, I feel it's the same old places. It's the same old places that are mentioned in the early history books, in the fictional stories about early pioneer life, and then my own very specific experience, my unique experience. So it shows how each of us is a construction of experiences. We have our experiences, and we have our narratives in a sense, but the toponyms are changing. But they have meaning. They have meaning in the, this historical story that I read. I understand that. I understand what the reference is to. But the thing that's being referred to, well, had a new name that I used, and now is named something totally different and is in fact materially much different. So what I'm saying is this, is to emphasize the value of your insight.
Oh, thank you.
of the importance of the toponym and how it guides and is also important in compared to the character names of a story.
Thank you. Thank you, Gran.
Thank you. We have maybe time. I don't know. We should. I mean, we are a little bit late now, but there is a question from Dorothy Robbins in the chat, who says that she was struck by Luisa's concept that discarded place names function as obituaries, and if you could expand upon that idea. And that's her question.
I can't read that. Where?
It's in the chat.
Can you say that today?
Yeah, I mean, it's about the concept that discarded place names function as obituaries. So
As a?
Obituaries.
Oh, yeah.
And if you could expand upon that.
Yeah. Because in a sense, whenever she either thinks herself of these places who are no longer there, so these places are no longer there, and they are kind of brought back to life either by memories or through the maps. So it's like mourning an absence, and that's what I meant. They are there as obituary, trying to remember someone who's no longer with us, with all that this memory reminds us of. And this a very delicate way of representing a very difficult situation of displaced people, of people who are not allowed to move. And it's so terribly difficult for this woman to move from area A to area C, where the museum she wants to visit is. She has to ask a colleague of hers to lend her her identity card, because there are so many different identity cards. Some of them allow you to move from one place to another, but so she can't rent the car. It's very difficult, and I really appreciated so much this book and the innovative way of representing a very difficult situation. So in spite of the topic, it's not a political novel. It's about our humanity, which is great. At least I'm sorry, I was very much in love. I am very much in love with this text. So I may be biased in spite of my attempt to be objective and collect data.
Oh, it's an emotional relationship, like you
Yeah,
were
it
talking.
is. It is.
Yeah.
I think it is very well written indeed.
Thank you. Just one last comment. This is from Alessia Batista, who says, "Thank you, Luisa. This reminded me of a book by an African author in which language is used to play with real place names to reflect people's feelings about them. For example, Detroit, Michigan becomes Destroyed, Michigan, to mirror the main character's feelings about her new life there, the life of an immigrant whose high expectations were definitely not met."
Oh, thank you, Alessia, for this nice, yeah.
Yeah, and the book actually is it's a novel by Violet Bulawayo, and the title is We Need New Names.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, we don't have, Mary Rieger, said that, the name of the book is it's We Need New Names by Bulawayo, and then that's it. So if there are it's just because we are a little bit late, we are running late, so it's 1:45 now, and I think that we should let people have a 15-minute break before the next session. So it was great. I mean,
thank you.
All the papers were very interesting. Also, different points of view, the different, fields, onomastics, literary onomastics, place names, personal names. So that was very good. So thank you very much for your papers.
Thank you, Mirko. Thank you, all of you.